I've watched people long enough to know help rarely comes from where you expect. Sometimes the one who saves you is a stranger walking down a road you've never seen before. Most folks don't talk about those moments, but I saw one happen once. Out in timber country, the tin of milk slipped. Lucas watched it roll across the floor, white liquid pooling in the dirt, while both babies screamed behind him. He didn't move. 4 a.m. The lamp had burned to red coals. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He looked at his fingers cracked, blistered, filthy. His wife's hands had been soft. She'd made it look easy. The crying grew louder. Lucas bent for the empty tin. His knees popped. Something in his back seized. The rocking chair in the corner sat empty. Dust on the armrests. It hadn't he moved in 6 weeks. 1 foot in front of the other. That's all he had. If this touched something in you, I'd be grateful to hear where you're watching from today. And if you've been enjoying these stories without subscribing, consider joining us. It helps more than you know. The logging site sat 1.5 miles from this cabin. Lucas made it in 40 minutes most days. Today it took him an hour, stopping twice to lean against a pine trunk and let the black spots clear from his vision. Old Emmett was already working when Lucas arrived. The older man looked up from his crosscut saw, spat a stream of tobacco juice, and said nothing, but his eyes traveled over Lucas's face, down to the tremor in his hands, back up again. Lucas grabbed his axe. The hickory handle felt heavier than yesterday, heavier than last week. He swung. The blade bit crooked into the log. He wrenched it free, swung again. "You eat this morning." Emmett's voice, low and flat. "Had coffee." "That ain't food." Lucas didn't answer. He swung, missed the mark by 2 inches. The axe glanced off the bark and nearly took his boot. Emmett stopped sawing. "Go home, son." "I'm fine." "You ain't fine. You're about to cut your own foot off, and I ain't carrying you back." Emmett straightened, cracked his spine with a grunt. "Ain't nobody gonna die if we're short a few logs." Lucas wanted to argue. The words wouldn't come. He stood there, axe dangling from one hand, staring at the fresh cut in the log without seeing it. "I buried 2 wives," Emmett said. "Know what kept me standing weren't pride. Pride, don't cook supper." The walk home was longer. The sun had shifted west by the time Lucas saw the smoke rising from his chimney, thin, weak, almost out. He'd forgotten to bank the fire properly this morning. He pushed open the door. The cabin smelled of sour milk and wet cloth. One cradle rocked where tiny fists had knocked against the bars. Both babies were crying, had probably been crying since he left. Lucas dropped the axe by the door. He reached into the nearest cradle, lifted his son against his chest. The boy's face was red, slick with tears and snot. Lucas bounced him, patted his back. The crying didn't stop. Then he heard the knock. 3 soft raps. Steady, patient. He turned, the baby still wailing against his shoulder, and pulled the door open with his free hand. A woman stood on his porch, dark hair, dust on her moccasins, a woven bundle strapped across her back. She looked at him, at the screaming infant, at the chaos behind him. "Water," she said. "Please." Lucas handed her the water ladle. She drank slow, watching him over the rim, watching the baby thrashing against his shoulder, watching the second one wailing in the cradle behind him. When she finished, she set the ladle on the porch rail, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Thank you." He nodded. The baby's screams drilled into his skull. His arms ached from bouncing, patting, rocking. Nothing worked. Nothing had worked for days. The woman stepped past him. He opened his mouth to say something. Wait. Stop. You can't just... But she was already inside, already bending over the second cradle, already lifting his daughter with hands that moved like they'd done this 1,000 times before. She held the infant against her chest. One palm flat on the small back, she began to hum low, rhythmic. Something without words. The crying stuttered, hitched, stopped. Lucas stood in the doorway, his son still screaming against his neck, and watched a stranger quiet his daughter in 30 seconds. The woman turned. Her eyes moved from the baby in her arms to the baby in his. Sit, she said. He sat, on the floor, because his legs gave out before he reached the chair. The woman knelt beside him. She shifted his daughter to one arm, then reached over and adjusted his grip on his son, tilting the boy's head slightly, pressing Lucas's palm firmer against the tiny spine. The screaming faded to a whimper, then silence. Lucas stared at his children, both quiet, both breathing slow and deep, the way they used to breathe when Clara held them. How? He said. His voice came out cracked. The woman didn't answer. She rose, carrying his daughter to the cradle, settling her down with movements so smooth the baby didn't stir. Then she turned to the cold hearth, the crusted Dutch oven, the empty water bucket. You need help, she said, not a question. Lucas looked at his son's sleeping face, at the chaos of the cabin, dirty clothes piled in the corner, dishes stacked in the basin, milk dried on the floor from this morning's spill. I ain't got money to pay you. Did I ask for money? She was already moving, gathering kindling, striking a match. The fire caught, crackled, threw orange light across the walls. She found the cornmeal tin, the lard, the cast-iron skillet. Her hands worked steady and sure. Lucas sat on the floor with his son in his arms and watched a stranger cook in his wife's kitchen. The meal was simple. Cornmeal mush with a little salt. She served it on tin plates, handed him one, sat across from him on an upturned crate. They ate in silence. Lucas finished his portion in 6 bites, barely tasting it. She ate slow, watching him, watching the cradles, watching the fire. When the plates were empty, she gathered them without asking and set them in the basin. Where do I sleep? Lucas's throat tightened. He hadn't thought about it, hadn't thought past the next feeding, the next diaper, the next hour. The shed, he said. The word came out rough. He pointed toward the door, toward the small woodshed 20 feet from the cabin. It's got a good roof, mostly. She looked at him. Her face showed nothing. I wasn't planning to melt. He found a wool blanket, army surplus, scratchy, the only spare he had. She took it without complaint. At the door, she paused. The little ones will wake in 4 hours, maybe 5. I will come. Then she was gone. The door closed behind her. Lucas heard her footsteps on the porch. Crossing the yard, the creak of the woodshed door, he sat alone in the firelight. His children slept. The cabin was quiet. He didn't know what to do with quiet. The hours passed. Lucas lay on his pallet, staring at the ceiling, listening for the cry that always came. His body tensed at every small sound, the pop of the fire, the rustle of wind against the walls, the settling of the logs. Nothing. The babies slept. He slept too. Finally, without meaning to, deep and black and dreamless. When he woke, the fire had burned to embers. Gray light leaked through the window. Dawn, maybe, or just before. Silence. Lucas sat up fast, His heart slammed against his ribs. Silence was wrong. Silence meant something bad. He scrambled to the cradles, looked down at his son, his daughter, both breathing, both peaceful, both wrapped in the quilts Clara had sewn before they were born. His hands shook. He pressed them flat against his thighs. The door creaked. Lucas spun. The woman stood in the doorway, the wool blanket folded over her arm, behind her. The sky had turned pale pink along the tree line. "They slept through," she said. "First time in a while, yes." He couldn't speak. He nodded. She crossed to the hearth, rebuilt the fire, set water to boil. Her movements were quiet, efficient, like she belonged here, like she'd always been here. Lucas stood by the cradles and watched her, watched a stranger make coffee in his wife's kitchen, watched her cut the mold off a half loaf of bread and set it to toast on the grate. His throat burned. "What's your name?" he said. She looked up from the fire. The pink light caught her face, caught the dust still clinging to her braids, caught something old and steady in her eyes. "Nayeli." "Lucas." He paused. "Lucas Sawyer." She nodded once. Then she turned back to the fire, and the coffee began to steam. And somewhere outside a bird started singing. Lucas looked at his sleeping children, at the woman by the hearth, at Clara's empty rocking chair in the corner, where dust had settled on the armrests and no one had sat for 6 weeks. He thought about what Emmett had said. Pride, don't cook supper. He thought about the quiet night, the first quiet night since Clara died. He thought about the woodshed and the scratchy army blanket, and the woman who had taken both without complaint. Then his daughter stirred in her cradle. Her small fist rose, rubbed against her face. Her mouth opened. Nayeli was already moving toward her, but Lucas got there first. He lifted his daughter, held her against his chest, felt her tiny heart beating through the thin cotton gown. Nayeli stood beside him, close enough that he could smell wood smoke and sage in her hair. "Show me," he said, "how you hold her. Show me how you made her stop." Nayeli looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and adjusted his hands the same way she had yesterday, patient and firm. "Like this," she said. "You feel her breathing, match yours to hers." Lucas closed his eyes, felt his daughter's small ribs expand and contract, slowed his own breath. The crying never came. When he opened his eyes, Nayeli had stepped back. She stood by the window, her face turned toward the rising sun, her hands folded in front of her, and Lucas realized, with a cold drop in his stomach, that he had no idea who this woman was, where she had come from, or why she had stopped at his door. 1 week changed everything. Lucas noticed it first in small ways. The floor, swept clean, the curtains, washed and hanging straight, the Dutch oven, scrubbed free of the black crust that had built up since Clara died. He noticed it in the mornings. Nayeli had the babies fed and changed before he woke. Coffee waiting on the table, cornbread wrapped in cloth to keep warm. He noticed it in himself, the way he came home earlier each day, the way he found reasons to linger at the door before heading to the logging site, the way he listened, always listening, for the sound of her voice. Today he came home at midday, told himself it was because the saw blade needed sharpening, told himself it was because Emmett had sent him back early. He knew it was a lie. The cabin door stood open. Late summer light poured through, casting a yellow rectangle across the pine floor. Lucas stopped at the edge of the porch and looked inside. Nayeli sat cross-legged on the floor, a baby in each arm. The twins faced her, propped against her knees, their small hands waving in the air. She clapped once, twice. The babies watched, eyes wide, mouths open. Then she sang, low and rhythmic. Words Lucas didn't understand. The melody rose and fell like water over stones, like wind through tall grass, like something ancient and patient and completely unlike anything Clara had ever sung. His son clapped his hands together. Once, clumsy, off-beat. Nayeli laughed. The sound filled the cabin, warm and sudden, and Lucas felt something shift in his chest, something he'd thought was dead, or at least buried too deep to reach. He must have made a noise, a breath, a creak of the porch boards, because Nayeli looked up, and her laughter faded, and for a moment they just stared at each other across the threshold. "You're early," she said. "Saw Lady needed work." She didn't challenge the lie. She gathered the babies, settled them in their cradles, smoothed the quilts over their fat legs. "There's coffee," she said. "I made it fresh." They sat at the table. Lucas wrapped his hands around the blue enamel cup and stared at the dark liquid inside. Steam rose, curled, vanished. The cabin smelled like cedar smoke and cornbread and something else, something floral. Faint that he had started noticing on the blankets and the curtains and the babies' clean gowns. "What was that song?" he said. Nayeli looked up. "An old one. My grandmother taught it to me. What's it about?" She was quiet for a long moment. Her fingers traced the rim of her own cup. "Stars," she said finally, "and the path they make across the sky, and a woman who followed that path to find her way home." Lucas nodded. He didn't know what to say to that. He took a sip of coffee. It had gone cold while he held it. "Your wife," Nayeli said. His hand tightened on the cup. "She sang to them too." "Yes." He couldn't look at her. He stared at the fire, at the orange coals pulsing in the grate, at the thin trail of smoke rising toward the chimney. "Clara," he said. The name came out rough, scraped, like something dragged over gravel. "She liked mornings best." His voice cracked. He kept going. "Always up before me, singing to the stove while she cooked. I used to lie in bed and listen, pretend I was still asleep so she'd keep going." He stopped, swallowed. The coffee cup trembled in his grip. "I can't remember the tune," he said. "I try. And it's just gone." Nayeli didn't say she was sorry, didn't reach across the table, didn't offer any of the hollow words people had thrown at him after the funeral words that bounced off his grief like pebbles off stone. She waited. Then, "What else?" Lucas looked at her. Her face was steady, open, waiting for more. "She had freckles," he said, "on her nose, on her shoulders. She hated them, said they made her look like a speckled egg." He almost laughed. "Almost. I told her she was the prettiest speckled egg I ever saw." Nayeli's mouth curved. Not quite a smile. Something softer. She was scared. When she found out it was twins, scared she wouldn't be enough, scared I wouldn't stay. His throat burned. "I told her I wasn't going anywhere, told her we'd figure it out together." The fire popped. A log shifted in the grate. "And then she died," Lucas said. "And I'm still here, and I can't even keep the floor clean." The words hung in the air. He heard them like they came from someone else, someone broken, someone pathetic. He waited for Nayeli to say something kind, something about time healing wounds, something about Clara watching from heaven. Instead, she said, "Grief you don't speak, it bends the back. I've seen old men curved like question marks from carrying it." Lucas let out a sound that was almost a laugh. Bitter, dry. Already feel about 80. You're not. She leaned forward slightly. You're still standing. He looked at her across the table, at her dark eyes, steady and calm, at the lines around her mouth that said she'd known her own share of loss, at the way she held herself straight-backed, still, like a woman who'd learned to weather storms. "What about you?" he said. She tilted her head. "Where'd you come from? Why were you walking alone on that road?" Nayeli set down her cup. She looked at the fire for a long moment. "My people lived in the mountains," she said. 3 years ago, the sickness came. Fever. It took my mother first, then my father, then my husband, then my daughter." Lucas's chest tightened. "I stayed as long as I could, buried them, said the prayers. Then I walked." She paused. "I've been walking since 3 years. Sometimes I stopped, worked for food, moved on." She shrugged a small motion, like shaking off rain. "The road led here. You needed help. I could give it." Lucas thought about the woodshed, about the scratchy army blanket, about the way she'd taken both without complaint, without asking for more. "That's it," he said. "You just help strangers." Nayeli looked at him. Something flickered in her eyes, not anger, not sadness, something harder to name. "When you have lost everything," she said, "helping others is how you remember you are still alive." The fire crackled. Outside, a crow called. The babies slept on, peaceful and quiet, in their cradles by the wall. Lucas thought about Clara, about the empty rocking chair, about the 6 weeks of silence and screaming and spilled milk and endless exhaustion. He thought about the week just past, the clean floor, the washed curtains, the quiet nights. He thought about the woman across the table, who had buried a husband and a daughter, and walked for 3 years, and still found it in herself to soothe the stranger's crying babies. "Nayeli," he said. She looked up. He didn't know what he wanted to say. "Thank you. Stay. I'm sorry. I don't understand." He opened his mouth and nothing came out. Then, from outside, the sound of hoofbeats. Nayeli went still. Lucas saw her shoulders tense, saw her hands flatten against the table. The hoofbeats grew closer, slowed, stopped. A knock at the door, heavy, impatient. Lucas rose. His legs felt unsteady. He crossed to the door and pulled it open. Mrs. Harmon stood on his porch, behind her, a buckboard wagon beside her. 2 women from the church faces he knew, names he couldn't remember. Mrs. Harmon's eyes moved past Lucas, into the cabin, to the woman sitting at his table. "Mr. Sawyer," she said. Her voice was sweet as honey and cold as well water. "We've come to check on the children, and to discuss a matter of some concern." Lucas stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance with his body. Behind him, he heard Nayeli rise from the table, the scrape of her chair against the floor, the soft pad of her footsteps moving toward the back of the cabin. Mrs. Harmon's eyes tracked the movement, her lips pressed thin. "May we come in, Mr. Sawyer? Babies are sleeping. We'll be quiet." She was already stepping forward, already pushing past him, already inside before he could say no. The 2 women followed Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Cobb. He remembered now. They clustered near the door, their bonnets bobbing as they surveyed the cabin. Lucas watched their eyes move, over the clean floor, the washed curtains, the scrubbed Dutch oven, the neat stack of firewood by the hearth. Mrs. Patterson's mouth opened slightly. Mrs. Cobb's eyebrows rose. Mrs. Harmon walked to the cradles. She bent over them, her skirts rustling against the floor. Lucas's hands curled into fists. "They look well," she said. Her voice carried a note of surprise she couldn't quite hide. "Clean. Fed. That's right." Mrs. Harmon straightened. She turned to face him, and her eyes slid past his shoulder to where Nayeli stood by the back window. "And this is the woman we've heard about." Lucas didn't answer. "The Indian woman," Mrs. Harmon continued, "living under your roof, caring for your children. Her name is Nayeli." "I'm sure it is." Mrs. Harmon adjusted her bonnet. Her fingers moved slow, deliberate. "Mr. Sawyer, I'm only thinking of the children. What example does this set?" The heat rose in Lucas's chest. He felt it spread up his neck, into his face. "The example of getting fed," he said. His voice came out tight, controlled, and cleaned, and held when they cry. "That example." Mrs. Harmon's chin lifted. "Well, I never—" "No," Lucas said. You never came when Clara died. You never brought food or offered to help. You never once asked how I was managing with 2 babies and no wife and no sleep for 6 weeks straight." The words poured out. He couldn't stop them. "But now you're here. Now you show up with your concern and your questions because a woman who walked up to my door and asked for water and stayed to help when she saw I was drowning because she isn't the right kind of woman. Is that it?" Mrs. Harmon's face had gone pale. Her jaw worked. "Mr. Sawyer, there is no need to raise your voice." "I'm not raising my voice." But he was. He could hear it bouncing off the walls. "I'm telling you the truth. This woman saved my children. She saved me. And if you've got a problem with that, you can get back on your wagon and ride home." Silence, the kind that rang. Mrs. Patterson shifted her weight. Mrs. Cobb stared at the floor. Mrs. Harmon drew herself up. "We only wanted to make sure the children were being properly cared for. Clearly they are. We'll take our leave." She swept toward the door. The other women followed, their skirts swishing against the threshold, at the porch. Mrs. Harmon paused. She looked back over her shoulder. "People talk. Mr. Sawyer, a widow man, an Indian woman under his roof. Surely you understand what that looks like." Lucas met her eyes. "I understand what it is. A man getting help. From someone willing to give it." Mrs. Harmon's lips pressed thin again. She turned and walked to the wagon. The other women climbed up beside her. The driver, a young man Lucas didn't recognize, snapped the reins. The wagon rolled away down the dirt road. Lucas watched until it disappeared behind the tree line. Then he walked back inside and closed the door. Nayeli stood by the window, her arms crossed over her chest. Her face was still, unreadable, but Lucas saw the tension in her shoulders, the tightness around her mouth. "I'm sorry," he said. She shook her head once. "Don't be." They had no right. They had every right. In their minds, she turned to face him. "You know how it looks. You knew before they came." Lucas's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, wanted to say it didn't matter what people thought, but the words wouldn't come, because they both knew it wasn't true. "I should leave," Nayeli said. "No." The word came out fast, too fast. Lucas saw something flicker in her eyes, surprise. Maybe. Or something else. "It would be easier for you," she said. "For the children." Easier isn't the same as right. She looked at him for a long moment. The fire crackled. One of the babies stirred in the cradle. Made a small sound. settled again. "The town will keep talking," she said. "Let them talk. They won't just talk. They'll make your life hard. They'll make it hard to buy supplies, hard to sell timber, hard to—" "I know." Lucas stepped closer. "I know what they'll do. I've lived here my whole life. I know these people." "Then you know I should go, and I'm asking you to stay." The words hung between them. Lucas felt his heart pounding against his ribs. He hadn't meant to say it like that, hadn't meant to say it at all. But it was out now, and he couldn't take it back. Nayeli's arms uncrossed. Her hands fell to her sides. She looked at him with those dark, steady eyes, and Lucas felt something shift. Something he'd been pushing down for days, pretending wasn't there. "Why?" she said. He didn't have an answer. Or he had too many answers, and none of them made sense. "Because the babies need you," he said finally. "Because I need—" He stopped, swallowed. "Because the cabin is clean," he said, "and the babies are sleeping. And I ate breakfast this morning sitting down, for the first time in 2 months. Because I can go to work without worrying they'll cry themselves sick. Because I came home yesterday and heard you singing, and it was the first time this place felt like something other than a grave." His voice cracked on the last word. He looked away. The fire popped. A log shifted in the grate. "Lucas!" He looked up. Nayeli had moved closer, close enough that he could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, close enough that he could smell the wood smoke and sage in her hair. "I will stay," she said. "For now." He nodded. His throat was too tight for words. "But we need supplies," she said. "We're almost out of cornmeal, salt, coffee." Lucas rubbed his face with both hands. The trip to town. He'd been putting it off for days, knowing what it would mean, knowing how people would look. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow." She moved past him, back to the hearth, back to the steady rhythm of work that had defined her days since she arrived. Lucas watched her stir the coals, add a fresh log, adjust the pot. Outside, the sun was dropping toward the tree line. Long shadows stretched across the yard. The crow called again, somewhere in the pines. Lucas thought about Mrs. Harmon, about the look on her face when she saw Nayeli, about the words she'd flung at him like stones. "People talk." "Let them," he'd said, but standing in his cabin, watching Nayeli work, he felt the weight of what was coming settle onto his shoulders, the whispers, the stares, the closed doors and turned backs. He thought about Clara, about what she would say if she could see him now. He thought about his children, sleeping peaceful in their cradles, not knowing that their father was about to walk them into a storm. And he thought about Nayeli, the woman who had lost everything and still found it in herself to help a stranger. The woman who had quieted his babies when he couldn't. The woman who had brought something back into this house that had been dark for too long. Tomorrow they would go to town. Tomorrow the real test would begin. But tonight, the cabin was warm, the babies were sleeping, and Lucas Sawyer was not alone. He crossed to the window and looked out at the darkening sky. In the distance, past the tree line, he could just see the road that led to town, the road that led to Mrs. Harmon, and the church, and all the people who would look at Nayeli and see only what they wanted to see. Lucas's jaw tightened. He had spent 6 weeks surviving, just surviving, getting through one day, 1 hour, 1 minute at a time. But survival wasn't enough anymore. Tomorrow, he would have to fight. The hoe had a cracked handle. Lucas found it in the shed behind a stack of old timber. The wood split halfway down from some forgotten blow. He wrapped it with a strip of leather. tested the weight, decided it would hold. Nayeli stood at the edge of the clearing, studying a patch of ground between the cabin and the tree line. The soil there looked dark, rich. Morning sun fell across it in long golden bars. "Here," she said, "this is good earth." Lucas walked over, looked at the ground, looked at her. "A garden, if you permit it." He thought about Clara. She'd wanted a garden too, talked about it their first spring here, made plans, sketched out rows on a scrap of paper. Then the pregnancy came, and the plans got set aside, and the scrap of paper disappeared into one of the drawers by the stove. "All right," he said. They worked side by side. Lucas swung the hoe, breaking up the packed earth. Nayeli followed behind, pulling rocks and roots, tossing them into a pile at the edge of the clearing. The sun climbed. Sweat soaked through Lucas's shirt. His shoulders burned, his back ached. He kept it going. By midday, they'd cleared a rectangle, roughly 10 feet by 6. Not much. Enough for potatoes. Maybe some squash. Enough to start. Nayeli knelt in the turned soil, crumbling a clod of earth between her fingers. She lifted it to her nose, inhaled. "Good," she said. "This will grow things." Lucas leaned on the hoe, watching her. The way she touched the soil, the way she studied it like she was reading something written there, the way her face softened, just slightly, when she spoke about what it might become. "You've done this before," he said. "My mother taught me, and her mother before her." She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "In the mountains. We grew corn and beans and squash together, the 3 sisters. We called them. They help each other grow." Lucas nodded. He didn't know much about farming. Timber was his trade, but he liked the idea of things helping each other. The weather had turned strange over the past few days, hot in the mornings, cold by evening, the kind of shift that made old bones ache and brought sickness to the young ones. Lucas had noticed Emmett coughing at the logging site, and 2 families in town had kept their children home with fevers. That night, after the babies were fed and sleeping, Nayeli sat by the fire with a piece of wood in her hands. Lucas watched her work a small knife over the surface, shaping something he couldn't quite make out. "What's that?" She didn't look up. "You'll see." 3 days passed. The garden took shape. Lucas built a rough fence around it. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep the rabbits out. Nayeli planted seed potatoes in neat rows, covered them with soil and straw, watered them from the bucket Lucas hauled up from the creek. On the 3rd evening, Emmett appeared at the edge of the clearing. He carried something wrapped in cloth, tucked under one arm. "Figured I'd stop by," he said. "See how you're managing." Lucas met him at the porch. Emmett's eyes moved over the cabin, the garden, the fence. "You been busy?" "Some." Emmett nodded slow. He unwrapped the cloth, revealing a clay jar sealed with wax. "Honeycomb," he said. "Fella over in Miller's Creek keeps bees. Traded him some timber for it." Lucas took the jar. It was heavy, warm from sitting in the sun. "What's the occasion?" Emmett scratched his beard. "Ain't it their birthday coming up, the little ones?" Lucas's stomach dropped. The birthday. He'd forgotten. 6 weeks of exhaustion, of barely surviving, and he'd forgotten his own children's first birthday. "How'd you know?" Lucas asked, his voice rough. "Asked the doc in town. He delivered 'em. Remember? Said it was right around harvest moon." Emmett spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Figured you might have lost track." Lucas couldn't speak. He stared at the jar of honey, at his own reflection in the smooth wax seal. behind him. The cabin door opened. Nayeli stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Emmett," she said, "you'll stay for supper." Emmett tipped his hat. "If it ain't too much trouble." "No trouble." She disappeared back inside. Lucas stood there, the honey jar heavy in his hands, shame burning in his chest. The birthday. Tomorrow. He walked into the cabin. Nayeli was already at the stove, mixing cornmeal and water and a precious spoonful of the sorghum molasses they had bought in town. "You knew," he said. She didn't turn around. "Yes." "How?" "You told me. The night you spoke about Clara. You said they were born in late summer, just before the harvest moon." She paused, stirring the batter. "Tomorrow is the harvest moon." Lucas set the honey jar on the table. His hands were shaking again, but not from exhaustion this time. "I forgot," he said. "My own children's birthday, and I forgot." Nayeli stopped stirring. She turned to face him. "You didn't forget them. You forgot a date. There's a difference." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out 2 small objects. Carved wood. Rough but recognizable. Horses, 2 of them. Each one small enough to fit in a baby's palm. "You said Clara loved to ride," Nayeli said. "The little ones should know." Lucas took the horses, turned them over in his hands. The wood was smooth, sanded by patient fingers. The shapes were simple, 4 legs. A curved neck, a suggestion of mane, but they were horses, real horses, made with care. His throat tightened until he couldn't breathe. "She'd have liked you," he said. The words came out rough, barely audible. "I think she'd have liked you a lot." Nayeli's eyes met his. She didn't smile, didn't speak, just nodded once, slow, and turned back to the stove. The next morning, Lucas woke to the smell of corn cakes cooking. Nayeli had been up since before dawn, mixing batter, tending the fire, setting the table with the good tin plates, the ones Clara had bought at the general store the year they were married. Emmett arrived at noon. He'd put on his Sunday shirt, the one with the collar, and combed his beard. "Happy birthday to the little ones," he said, handing Lucas a second jar of honey. "Didn't know if the first one was enough." They gathered around the table. The babies sat propped in their cradles, pulled close so they could see. Nayeli brought out the corn cakes, stacked high on a plate, drizzled with honey and sorghum. Lucas held up one of the carved horses. His son's eyes went wide. A fat hand reached out, grabbed for it. "Easy now," Lucas said. "That's yours. This one here's for your sister." He gave the second horse to his daughter. She promptly stuck it in her mouth. Emmett laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that Lucas hadn't heard in months. "Got her mama's appetite," Emmett said. "Got her mama's stubbornness, too." They ate. The corn cakes were sweet, the honey rich, the coffee strong. The babies smashed cake in their hair and on their faces, and all over the quilts. No one cared. Emmett leaned back in his chair, watching the twins with something soft in his eyes. "They got her eyes," he said. "You're Clara." Lucas nodded. "Yeah. But they got something else now." Emmett paused, scratched his chin. "Ain't sure what to call it." Lucas looked at his children, at their sticky faces, their bright eyes, the wooden horses clutched in their small fists. "Ain't sure either," he said. After supper, Emmett shook Lucas's hand on the porch. "You're doing all right," he said. "Better than all right." "Doesn't feel like it. Never does. Not till later. When you look back. Emmett glanced toward the cabin, where Nayeli was washing the dishes. She's good for them. Good for you, too. Lucas didn't answer. Emmett mounted his horse, touched his hat brim. Mrs. Harmon been talking to the deacon, Emmett said, his voice lower now. He's been riling folks up since Sunday. You might want to keep your head down for a spell. He rode off down the trail, disappearing into the dusk. Lucas stood on the porch, watching the stars come out one by one. Inside, he could hear Nayeli humming that low, rhythmic melody she sang to the babies when she put them to sleep. He thought about the garden, the carved horses, the corn cakes and honey, and the sound of Emmett laughing. He thought about Clara, and the life they'd planned, and the life he was building now. He thought about the woman inside his cabin, washing his dishes, singing to his children, putting down roots in soil she'd only just touched. The door opened behind him. Nayeli stepped out, wiping her hands on a cloth. "They're asleep," she said. Lucas nodded. He didn't turn around. "Emmett's right," he said. "You're good for them." Silence. Then her footsteps, crossing the porch, stopping beside him. "And for you?" she asked. Lucas finally looked at her face in the starlight, at the question in her eyes, at the careful distance she kept between them. He opened his mouth to answer. Then, from inside the cabin, one of the babies began to cry. But this cry was different, high and sharp and panicked. Not hunger, not tiredness, something wrong. Lucas was through the door before he knew he was moving. Nayeli right behind him. Both of them running toward the cradles where his son was screaming and thrashing and burning hot to the touch. The fever broke before dawn. Nayeli worked through the night cool cloths on the baby's forehead. A tea made from herbs she pulled from her bundle. Soft words in her language that Lucas couldn't understand, but felt in his bones. He sat useless in the corner, watching, unable to help, unable to do anything but watch his son's small body shake and sweat and burn. When the fever finally passed and the baby slept, truly slept, chest rising and falling slow and steady, Lucas walked out onto the porch and vomited into the bushes. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. His legs gave out. He sat on the porch steps, head between his knees, gulping air that tasted like bile and fear. Inside, Nayeli was cleaning up. He could hear her moving. Water in the basin, the creak of the floorboards, the soft clink of the tin cup against the table. He had done nothing but sit and watch and pray useless prayers that felt like throwing pebbles at a mountain. Clara would have known what to do. Clara always knew, but Clara was dead, and Lucas couldn't even keep his son alive without a stranger's help. Emmett found him 3 hours later, still sitting on the porch, still shaking. The old man dismounted slow, tied his horse to the fence post, walked over with that deliberate gait of a man who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. "Heard the boy was sick," Emmett said. "Who told you?" "Miss Patterson. She rode by this morning. Saw Nayeli hanging wet cloths on the line." Emmett spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "She told half the town by noon." Lucas closed his eyes. "There's more," Emmett said. His voice had gone flat, careful. "The church elders met last night. Deacon Harmon called the meeting. Let me guess, they're concerned. They're more than concerned." Emmett sat down on the step beside him. "They're talking about refusing to sell to you. Flour, salt, nails, anything. They want to make life so hard you'll have to leave." Lucas's stomach turned. "They can't do that. They can and they will. It's a small town. The Harmons own the general store. The Pattersons supply the timber mill. The Cobbs run the feedlot. Emmett paused. They've got you surrounded. Son. The shaking got worse. Lucas pressed his palms flat against his thighs, trying to still them. What am I supposed to do? Emmett didn't answer right away. He looked out at the clearing, at the garden Nayeli had planted, at the fence Lucas had built around it. You could send her away, he said finally. Make peace with them. Go back to how things were. The words hit Lucas like a fist. Send her away. Go back. Back to the screaming babies and the dirty cabin and the endless, crushing weight of doing everything alone. Back to the silence and the spilled milk and the rocking chair gathering dust in the corner. I can't, Lucas said. Can't or won't. He didn't have an answer. Emmett stood, brushed off his trousers. I am on your side, Lucas. You know that. But I can't fight the whole town. Nobody can. He mounted his horse and rode away without looking back. Lucas sat on the porch until the sun began to drop. Then he walked. He didn't know where he was going, just walked down the trail, through the trees, along the creek bed where the water ran brown and slow. The rain started around dusk, light at first, then harder. Lucas kept walking. His boots sank into the mud. His shirt soaked through. Water ran down his face, into his eyes, dripped from his chin. He came to the place where Clara was buried. The grave was 1/2 mile up the ridge, past the old oak. The wooden cross stood crooked, tilted by months of rain and neglect. The mound of dirt had settled, sunk in the middle. Weeds grew around the edges. Lucas fell to his knees. The mud was cold. It soaked through his trousers, caked on his hands as he braced himself. Rain pounded his back. He stared at the crooked cross, at Clara's name carved rough into the wood, at the grave of the woman who had made everything make sense. I can't do this, he said. The rain swallowed his words. I can't do this without you. I don't know how. I don't know. His voice broke. He dropped forward, palms in the mud, forehead almost touching the ground. The rain beat down. The mud sucked at his knees, his hands pulling him down into the earth. He stayed there, minutes, maybe longer, until the rain slowed and his arms gave out and he collapsed sideways into the muck. Lying there like something dead, like something that had given up. When he finally stood, his clothes were brown with mud. It covered his hands, his face, his hair. He looked down at himself and almost laughed a rough, ugly sound that came out more like a sob. This was what he'd become. A man lying in the mud at his wife's grave, unable to stand, unable to fight, unable to do anything but surrender. He walked home in the dark. The cabin glowed warm through the windows. Smoke rose from the chimney. Inside, Nayeli would be feeding the babies, tending the fire, doing all the things he couldn't do. She met him at the door. Her eyes moved over his mud-caked clothes, his dirty face, his empty hands. She didn't ask where he'd been. The children are sleeping, she said. The boy's fever hasn't returned. Lucas nodded. He couldn't look at her. Emmett told me, she said, about the town, about what they're planning. Then you know. Yes. He forced himself to look up, to meet her eyes. You should leave, he said. Go somewhere else. Find people who won't treat you like what? Like something wrong, something shameful. Nayeli's face didn't change. She stood in the doorway, straight-backed. Still. Is that what you think I am? No. The word came out ragged, No, but they do. And they'll make your life impossible if you stay. They'll make you— Make me what? He couldn't finish. He stood there in his muddy clothes, covered in the dirt of his wife's grave, and felt the shame rise up and choke him. I'm trying to protect you, he said. You're trying to protect yourself. Her voice was flat, not angry, something worse, from hoping. I know the difference. The words hit him like cold water. She turned away, walked to the corner where her bundle sat, half unpacked. She picked up the wool blanket, began to fold it. Lucas watched her hands, steady, deliberate, folding the blanket she'd slept under for weeks, the blanket that smelled like wood smoke and sage. His chest tightened until he couldn't breathe. Nayeli. She didn't stop. Nayeli. Wait. She tied the bundle cord, tested the knot, reached for her shawl. I'll ask you once. Lucas Sawyer. She turned to face him. Her eyes were dark, unreadable. Do you want me gone? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The fire crackled. The babies slept. The rain had stopped, and somewhere outside a nightbird called. No, he said. The word tore out of him. No, I don't want you gone. I never wanted you gone. She didn't move, didn't speak. I'm scared, he said. I'm scared of what they'll do. I'm scared of losing you. I'm scared of— He stopped, swallowed. I'm scared of needing someone again, because the last time I needed someone, she died, and I almost died too. The confession hung in the air, raw and exposed. Nayeli set down the bundle. She crossed the room, stopping an arm's length away, close enough that he could see the firelight reflected in her eyes. Fear makes you push things away, she said. But good things you should hold tighter. Lucas looked at her, at this woman who had walked out of nowhere and saved his children. Saved him. Stay, he said. Please, I don't care what the town says. I don't care what they do. Stay. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his face, just a brush of fingers against his muddy cheek. I will stay, she said, but not like this. Not hiding, not pretending. What do you mean, if I stay? You must stand, in front of them, in front of everyone. Her eyes held his. Can you do that? Lucas Sawyer, can you stand? Before he could answer, the sound of hoofbeats cut through the night. Fast, urgent, coming up the trail toward the cabin. Lucas turned toward the door. A rider burst into the clearing, lantern swinging from his saddle. Lucas recognized him, young Tom Cobb, the feedlot owner's son. Mr. Sawyer. The boy was breathless, pale. You need to come to town. Now. There's a meeting at the church, tomorrow morning. First light. Deacon Harmon called it. They're deciding they're voting on whether to— He stopped, looked at Lucas's mud-caked clothes, his dirty face. Whether to what? Lucas said. Tom swallowed. Whether to refuse you business, all of it. Every store, every mill, every supplier in the county. Lucas didn't wash the mud off. He grabbed Clara's father's old Sunday coat from the hook by the door, the one he'd worn to the funeral, the one that still smelled faintly of mothballs and grief, and pulled it on over his filthy shirt. You don't have to do this, Nayeli said. He turned. She stood by the cradles, one hand resting on the edge where the babies slept. Her face was calm, but her fingers gripped the wood hard enough to whiten her knuckles. Yeah, Lucas said. I do. For once in my life, I gotta do the right thing loud. He hitched the wagon in the early light. The horses stamped and snorted, unhappy to be working at this hour. Lucas didn't care. His hands moved automatic harness, traces, reins, while his mind raced ahead to the church, to the faces that would be waiting, to the words he didn't know how to say. Nayeli came out with the babies wrapped in their quilts. She climbed onto the wagon seat without asking permission. The twins slept on, oblivious. They rode in silence. The sun rose slow, casting long shadows across the trail. Lucas's jaw ached from clenching. His stomach churned. The mud on his clothes had dried to a crust, cracking every time he moved. The church glowed at the end of Main Street. Wagons and horses lined the hitching posts. The whole town was there. Lucas pulled up at the edge of the churchyard. His hands were shaking again. "Stay here," he said to Nayeli. No. He looked at her. "If you stand," she said. "I stand with you." She climbed down from the wagon, the babies in her arms. Lucas watched her walk toward the church doors, straight-backed, steady, not slowing down. He followed. The doors swung open. The noise hit him, first voices. Dozens of them, arguing and talking over each other. Then the smell candle wax, sweat. Too many bodies in too small a space. The talking stopped. Every face turned. Mrs. Harmon in the front pew, her mouth a thin line. Deacon Harmon at the pulpit, his hand frozen mid-gesture. Mrs. Patterson, Mrs. Cobb, old Mr. Miller from the feed store, the school teacher, Miss Clara Young, dark-haired, sitting alone in the back row, and Emmett, standing against the wall, arms crossed, face unreadable. Lucas walked down the aisle. His boots echoed on the wooden floor. Mud flaked off with every step, leaving a trail of dirt on the clean boards. He saw Mrs. Harmon's eyes drop to his clothes, saw her lip curl. He kept walking. His legs shook, but he kept standing at the front of the church. He turned, faced them all. The silence was absolute. "I ain't good at speeches," Lucas said. His voice cracked on the first word. He cleared his throat, tried again. "Never was." His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He twisted his hat brim, crushing the felt. "I know why you're here. I know what you're voting on. You want to cut me off. That's your right. I suppose. It's your town." He stopped, swallowed. The words were stuck somewhere in his chest, tangled up with the fear and the shame and the desperate need to make them understand. This woman. He nodded toward Nayeli, standing at the back with the babies. "Her name is Nayeli. She came to my door 6 weeks ago, asking for water. My children were screaming. The cabin was a wreck. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since Clara died." His voice broke on his wife's name. He pushed through. She didn't have to help. She could have drunk her water and walked on. But she stayed. She fed my babies when I couldn't. She sat up all night when my boy had a fever. He looked at Mrs. Harmon, at her thin lips and cold eyes. "You came to my cabin, Mrs. Harmon. You saw how clean it was. You saw how healthy the children looked. And you still stood there and asked what example I was setting." Mrs. Harmon's chin lifted. Her fingers tightened on her Bible. "I'll tell you what example," Lucas said. "Getting help when you need it. Accepting kindness from a stranger. Not being too proud to admit you can't do everything alone." He stopped twisting his hat, let his hands fall to his sides. "I aim to marry her, if she'll have me. If she won't, that's her right. But I ain't hiding no more." His voice steadied. "That's all I got." He stopped talking. The silence stretched. Then Deacon Harmon stepped forward. "Mr. Sawyer." His voice was low, controlled. "We appreciate your candor, but surely you understand our concern. A man living with a woman who is not his wife, a woman of a different race, a different faith, this reflects poorly on our entire community." "Does it? The good book tells us. The good book tells us to love our neighbors." Lucas's voice came out stronger than he expected. "It tells us to care for widows and orphans. It tells us to show mercy to strangers." Deacon Harmon's jaw tightened. "This woman," Lucas continued, "showed more Christian charity in one afternoon than this church has shown me in 6 weeks. Not one of you came when Clara died. Not one of you brought food or offered to help. You left me to drown. And now you're angry because someone else threw me a rope." The words hung in the air. Lucas saw something flicker across Deacon Harmon's face. Not anger. Something else. Something that looked almost like shame. Mrs. Harmon stood slowly from her pew. Her face had gone pale. "He's right," she said. The church went still. "I was there when Clara passed. I brought a casserole, left it on the porch." Her voice wavered. "Didn't even knock." She pressed her hand to her mouth. Her husband reached for her arm. She shook him off. "I was cruel," she said. "I was cruel because I was afraid." The silence that followed was different, softer, like something had shifted in the room. Deacon Harmon stood frozen at the pulpit. His mouth opened, closed. He looked at his wife, at Lucas, at Nayeli standing in the back with the babies. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we have been hasty. Perhaps we've been wrong." This from old Mr. Miller, standing up from his seat. "I remember when Lucas's father built this church. Laid half the boards himself, and now we're voting to cut off his son because he accepted help from a stranger." Another voice, "She saved those children." Another, "Emmett says she's a good woman." Another, "Who are we to judge?" The room shifted. Lucas watched it happen, the tide turning. Not because anyone defended him, but because the people who'd condemned him were looking inward, finding their own failures, their own cruelties, their own fears. Mrs. Harmon sat down heavily. Her husband stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his face creased with something that might have been guilt. Deacon Harmon cleared his throat. "I believe," he said, "we should table this vote. It seems we have much to discuss among ourselves before we presume to judge others." A murmur of agreement rippled through the church. Lucas stood at the front, his muddy clothes and twisted hat and shaking hands, and felt something loosen in his chest. He turned, walked back down the aisle. The faces that watched him now were different, not friendly. Exactly, but not hostile. Uncertain, thoughtful, at the back of the church. Nayeli waited. The babies slept in her arms. She looked at him, a question in her eyes. Lucas took her arm, gentle, firm. "Let's go home," he said. They walked out into the morning. The sun was higher now, the air cool and clean. Behind them, the church hummed with voices, not the angry buzz of before, but something quieter, more reflective. Lucas helped Nayeli onto the wagon, took the reins, clicked his tongue at the horses. They rode in silence for a long time. The trail unspooled ahead of them, gold in the morning light. Then Nayeli spoke. "You said you aimed to marry me." Lucas's hands tightened on the reins. "I did." "You said it in front of the whole town." "I did." Silence. The wagon wheels creaked. The babies stirred in their quilts. "You never asked me," Nayeli said. Lucas's heart stopped. He turned to look at her. Her face was calm, Unreadable. Nayeli, you told them what you wanted. You never asked what I wanted. The words hit him like a bucket of cold water. She was right. He'd stood up in that church and declared his intentions without ever asking if she shared them. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have. Ask me now." He pulled the wagon to a stop. The horses snorted. Shaking their heads, the morning light fell across Nayeli's face, across the sleeping babies in her arms. Lucas's mouth went dry. "Nayeli," he said, "will you?" She held up one hand, stopped him. "Before you ask," she said, "there is something you should know, something I haven't told you." The morning light turned Nayeli's face to gold and shadow. Lucas waited. The reins loose in his hands, the horses shifting in their traces. "When I told you about my daughter," Nayeli said, "I did not tell you everything." Lucas didn't speak. He watched her fingers tighten on the quilts wrapped around the sleeping babies. "She was 3 years old when the fever came. I did everything I knew. The herbs, the prayers, the cool cloths." Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "For 5 days I fought. For 5 days she burned, and on the 6th day, she opened her eyes and looked at me, and I thought I believed she would live." She stopped, drew a breath. "That night, I fell asleep. I was so tired. I had not slept in days. I told myself I would rest for just a moment, and then I would check on her again." The silence stretched. Lucas felt his chest tighten. "When I woke," Nayeli said, "she was gone." The words fell into the morning air like stones into deep water. "I was not there," she said. "When my daughter needed me most, I was sleeping. I did not hold her hand. I did not sing to her. I did not—" Her voice cracked. She pressed her lips together, hard. Lucas reached across the wagon seat, took her hand. Her fingers were cold. "You were exhausted," he said. "You fought for 5 days. You did everything you could. It was not enough." "It's never enough. That's not your fault." She looked at him. Her eyes were wet, but she did not cry. "When I came to your door," she said, "I heard your babies crying. I heard the sound of a man drowning, and I thought if I can save them, if I can help him, then perhaps—" She stopped, shook her head. "Perhaps what?" "Perhaps I am not as worthless as I believe." Lucas felt something shift in his chest. He understood now. The way she worked without rest. The way she watched over the babies through the night. The way she gave and gave and gave, never asking for anything in return. She was trying to earn back something she thought she'd lost. "Nayeli," he said, "look at me." She turned. Her face was pale in the morning light. "What happened to your daughter was not your fault. You were a mother who loved her child. You fought for her until your body gave out. That's not failure. That's love." She was quiet for a long moment. "And you," she said finally, "you still feel you failed Clara. Because you couldn't save her. Because the babies lived, and she did not." Lucas's throat tightened. He hadn't said those words out loud, hadn't admitted them even to himself, but she was right. He carried that guilt like a stone in his chest. "We are the same," Nayeli said, "both of us carrying what we cannot put down." "Maybe," Lucas said. "We don't have to carry it alone." She looked at him. The morning light caught the tears on her cheeks, silver tracks running down to her jaw. "Ask me," she said. Lucas took a breath. "Let it out slow." "I know I should ask your family," he said. "I know that's how it's done. But you don't have family here. And I don't have much to offer, just a cabin and 2 babies and a man who is still learning how to stand up straight." Nayeli's mouth curved. Not quite a smile, something softer. "Nayeli, will you stay? Not as help, not as a stranger passing through. Will you stay as my wife, as the mother of these children, as—" He stopped, found the word, "as my family." She didn't answer right away. She looked at the babies in her arms, at the trail ahead, at the sky full of morning light. Then she said, "Yes." 6 weeks later, the garden gave up its harvest. Lucas carried the squash in a wooden crate, setting it on the porch while Nayeli pulled the last of the beans from their vines. The late squash had come from seeds she had brought in her bundle planted earlier than he'd known. Growing slow and steady through the strange autumn weather, the twins sat in the dirt nearby, fat legs stretched out in front of them, wooden horses clutched in their fists. The boy stood first. He wobbled, reached for the fence post, missed. Lucas caught him before he fell. "Easy now," Lucas said. "1 step at a time." The boy grinned a gummy, drooly grin, and took another step, then another. "Look at you," Lucas said. "Walking like you own the place." Nayeli straightened up from the garden, a basket of beans over her arm. She watched the boy toddle toward his sister, watched the girl reach up her arms to be lifted. "They grow fast," she said. "Too fast." Lucas picked up his daughter, settled her on his hip. She grabbed at his collar, pulled it toward her mouth. "Hungry again," he said. "Always hungry." They walked inside together. The cabin smelled like cedar smoke and drying herbs, rosemary and sage hanging in bunches from the rafters. The way Nayeli had arranged them. The floor was swept. The curtains were white. The Dutch oven simmered on the hearth. Home. It felt like home now. Emmett arrived at noon, his horse dusty from the ride. He dismounted slow, tied the reins to the fence post, walked up to the porch with that deliberate gait Lucas had come to know so well. "Mrs. Sawyer," Emmett said, tipping his hat to Nayeli. "Mr. Sawyer." The name came out natural, easy, like he'd been saying it for years. Nayeli smiled, not the careful, guarded expression Lucas had seen before, a real smile, crinkling the corners of her eyes, lifting her whole face. "Mr. Emmett," she said, "you'll stay for supper. Wouldn't miss it." They ate at the table, corn cakes and beans and squash from the garden. Honey drizzled over everything. The twins sat in their high chairs, smashing food into their faces and onto the floor and into their hair. Lucas reached across the table, took Nayeli's hand. She looked at him, her fingers curled around his. "You look different," Emmett said, watching them. Lucas turned. "How so?" "Can't say exactly." Emmett scratched his beard. "You look like a man who's found something he wasn't looking for." Lucas thought about that, about the woman at his table, the children in their chairs, the cabin warm and full and alive. "Maybe I did," he said. After supper, Emmett rode home. Lucas walked him to the fence, shook his hand. "Thank you," Lucas said, "for everything, for standing by me when nobody else would." Emmett shrugged. "Wasn't hard. You're a good man. Lucas, always were. Just needed someone to remind you." He mounted his horse, touched his hat brim. "Take care of that family," he said. "They're a fine one." He rode off down the trail, disappearing into the dusk. Lucas stood on the porch, watching the stars come out. Some folks in town still crossed the street when they saw him and Nayeli together, but others nodded now. Even Mrs. Patterson had waved once. awkward and quick, like she wasn't sure she was allowed. Inside, he could hear Nayeli moving washing dishes, settling the children, singing that low, rhythmic song she had taught him to love. He walked inside. Nayeli sat in the rocking chair, Clara's rocking chair, the chair that had gathered dust for months, that Lucas couldn't bear to look at, couldn't bear to touch. Now Nayeli sat in it, the boy on her lap, his head against her chest. She rocked slow, steady, the runners creaking on the pine floor. Her voice rose and fell, the Apache song about stars and paths and finding your way home. Lucas stood in the doorway, his daughter in his arms. The lamplight flickered, casting warm shadows across the walls, outside. The evening star hung low over the tree line. He didn't feel guilt. He didn't feel grief. He felt something else, something warm and full and quiet. The girl stirred against his shoulder. Her small hand reached up, patted his face. "Da," she said. Lucas's breath caught. "What did you say to Da?" She patted his face again. "Da." Nayeli stopped singing. She looked up from the rocking chair, her eyes bright. "Her first word," she said. Lucas looked at his daughter, at her round face, her dark eyes. The curl of hair stuck to her forehead. "Da," she said again, and smiled. He crossed the room, sat down on the floor beside the rocking chair, his daughter in his arms, his son in Nayeli's lap, the fire crackling low in the hearth. "They won't remember the bad time," he said. "Will they?" Nayeli reached out, touched his face, the way she had that night on the wagon. "No," she said. "They'll remember this, you and me and this cabin. That's what they'll carry." Lucas nodded. His throat was too tight for words. The rocking chair creaked, the lamp flickered, the fire popped and settled. Outside, the stars wheeled slow across the autumn skein. The garden slept under a blanket of straw. The forest stood dark and quiet around the clearing. And inside the cabin, a family sat together, not the family Lucas had planned, not the family he'd expected, but a family all the same. He reached up, took Nayeli's hand. She squeezed his fingers. The rocking chair moved, steady and slow, carrying them forward into the night. There is a certain quiet that follows a story like this one, not the silence of emptiness, but the kind that settles into the chest and stays there a while, heavy, tender, familiar. Some of us know what it is to carry grief so long it becomes part of how we walk. Many of us have stood at a crossroads, unsure whether to reach for something new or hold tighter to what we have already lost. Perhaps you have loved someone without knowing how to say it. Perhaps you have been helped by a stranger and never found the words to explain what that meant. These things do not need to be understood. They do not need to be resolved or explained or wrapped in meaning. They are allowed to simply rest the way a fire rests after it has warmed a room, the way a rocking chair rests after the singing stops. It is enough to have carried this story together for a little while. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.